The Arizona Cardinals, our 2023 preview for the Arizona Cardinals. This was pretty simple. I mean, this is square one, truly square one. And that goes for all of this organization. So this is from the top down. We're starting over. If you look at the history of the Arizona Cardinals and the way that the organization was structured, essentially every single GM they hired over the entire lifespan that the Arizona Cardinals specifically have existed, they've hired from within the organization. So it's always been some guy who really his only job in football was working for the Cardinals. Steve Keim was like that. So all of their practices, all of their scouting methods, the way the building is organized was never checked from someone from the outside. There was no one who ever came in and be like, why are we doing this? And so Monty Ossenfort now comes in as their GM. They're starting over with everything.
How he has a Patriot background.
Yes. So this scouting system, how they talk about players, what the grading system looks like for players, all of that, square one. Yeah. And that's where this team is. And the same thing goes for Gannon, and the same thing goes for the coaching staff. The kind of what they've been talking about now, scheme, whatever, X's and O's, fine. This is about what does winning culture look like? And that has been, as far as I understand it, like a pretty big part of his message. And that can sound silly and whatever, but that's where we're at here. It is, what is a winning organization? How does that look? And I think from the scouting staff to the coaching staff to how it feels in the building every day, that is the discourse that is currently going on for the Cardinals. That's as simple as it is.
It's a realistic culture reset. It's not they get in there and they're like, oh, well, we might surprise some teams. We're going to be surprised. They know what they're getting into and they're acting like it, which is just really cool. I mean, DJ Humphries already had a quote about how like, oh, wow, they actually care if we're on time for meetings. It's like, that's so embarrassing that I just had like a guy to come out and say that, like a guy that's been around, a former first round pick that you've paid. And he's saying that. It's like, oh my God, what the accountability, that's what they're building up. And that's culture.
And that is exactly what it is.
It is. It has to be. Like you said, it starts at the top. I mean, they've tried and they've had some interesting flashes a couple of years ago, but it's like this entire franchise needs it.
Never felt sustainable. Always felt like a flash in the pan. Even with Bruce Arians getting in there, it always felt like it was a 35-year-old Carson Palmer.
Yeah, it was a team built from spare parts from other things. Nothing was like homegrown. Yeah,
ever. And so I absolutely think that's what they're trying to do. Even the Paris Johnson pick, talking to people there, I went there before camp started, and why Paris Johnson at that stage. And so much of the reason that they were excited about drafting Paris Johnson were not football reasons. It was, this guy is like, football character is just off the charts. And that wasn't a cliche. It was we are starting from this point. We want to make sure that the guys that we're investing in, paying, making the bedrock of this organization are wired this way, are going to be the sort of beacons that we can point to when we're talking about what we want this to feel like. And that everything you hear about Paris Johnson, that's the type of guy he is.
Yes.
So
watch him run block.
It's not an accident that's the type of guy that they wanted to bring in and have it be the first move that they made.
And what school he comes from, a school that wins a lot of games and competes for championships every year. And he's now one of your building blocks, or hopefully your building blocks. It's like, that's where the success comes from. It's like, you get a lot of guys with that type of mindset. You want your leaders to be the example, or obviously, or your best players to be the example. You want your best players to set the precedent. We talked about that with the Steelers. It's like all their best players are the ones leading the drills, probably the first ones in every day. It's like, that's what you want. And I think the Cardinals team is like, they brought in like JJ Watt and Rodney Hudson and stuff, but those guys weren't homegrown. They're on their last legs as pros. So I think that's where getting a guy like that with that mindset is huge. I'm glad they went line and like had no questions about it and just going like, no, we got to start from scratch. And that's how you start from scratch.
Not an accident, my friend.
No.
After the way that the last team, like set of teams were built and the things they chased with their resources, I don't think it's an accident that the first thing they did was draft an offensive tackle.
Love it.
And the second round was a pass rusher. Like that's the first two things they did. They went out and got an offensive tackle and a pass rusher. Not an accident.
From LSU, another big school guy. Like they're getting these blue blood programs into their program.
Biggest question about the Arizona Cardinals offense.
I mean, I just said their starting three receivers average 5'8". So how do you think I feel? I don't know what like a question is or whatever. It's like the most interesting.
Hard to talk about them in the same terms like you talk about teams. It's worth acknowledging that.
Yeah, the most interesting young guy on their whole team is their offensive lineman we just talked about, and Paris Johnson. James Conner is still productive, but it's like who do they got? I just want to see what the offense they use. Their offense coordinator is it Drew Petzing.
Yes.
He has a background in like in a zone running, type of offense.
So
And
Drew comes from Cleveland. He was with Kevin Stefanski for the last couple of years. Drew was the tight ends coach for a couple seasons, and then was the quarterbacks coach last year. Stefanski always assumed that he would lose him because of Drew's reputation around the league. Smart guy, interviewed for the Raiders offensive coordinator job last year, didn't get it. So Jonathan knows Drew from their time in Minnesota together when Drew was with Kevin. So that connection, he's a reasonable kind of logical choice for this job. Yeah. So even though his most recent experience is with that sort of offense, like Stefanski, he's seen everything. Because he was in Minnesota for years. So Norv Turner came through there. Gary Kubiak came through there. So he's seen a bunch of different sorts of offense. And I think that even though the language they're going to use is based probably on what the Browns did last year, I think the ideas are going to be pretty varied because of his background.
I know I've heard of him, and but I don't, obviously it's his first time calling plays, so you never know until they actually have to do it. But my optimism with him is that, in theory, is that he will understand what he's got and not ask his offense to drop back over and over and over and over. Like he's going to put huge training wheels on this offense. That's why I'm optimistic about. So I think really just the thing is just let's like see what we got. And I think he'll put in position to see what they have. And really that's my takeaway with this offense is what is his version of this offense going to look like, and who are their pieces that they might, just invest in for outside of this year. It's really as simple as that. And that includes Kyler. It's just such a
lot mess. Of the foundational aspects of the offense, I think you'll recognize them from what they did in Cleveland, because again, that is a way to protect your players. And I do think that even your quarterback, what they asked Kyler to do, so Kyler in 2022, I believe, had 5 under center play action snaps, 5 over the entire season. There will be more of that even when he does come back and play, just to give him a couple off, just to make the game a little bit easier on your quarterback. So I think
he's good at
it. Because there's no questions. Athletically, he can obviously do it. And
he's got a big arm.
You're condensing the game for him. You're making things easier on him. So even if you don't want to make that the entirety of your offense because he's good out of the gun and the running ability and everything else, I still think that giving him half dozen of those plays every single game to give him a playoff, it's not a hard sell to your quarterback. So I think we'll see more of that. But one experience that I think is actually pretty important here is that what the Brown staff had to go through with Deshaun Watson last year in the sense of incorporating aspects of the offense that were different than what they had done before. So the RPOs, a lot of the gun stuff, and even having to do it with that, knowing he wasn't going to play. So understanding what sort of practice time you should allocate to it. When do we start introducing this stuff? So that they're going through a fairly similar process here because Kyler's not healthy.
They are.
So you're not going to practice all the Kyler stuff right now, but you're going to have to use it later on. So I think that experience that they went through in Cleveland last year is informing maybe how they want to handle some of this stuff. And even some of the ideas that they ran out in Cleveland last year, the RPOs, the gun, that kind of thing, I think that you'll see that with Kyler. So it's not like all these concepts are foreign to this staff. They've had to work in them before as recently as last year.
That's what would frustrate me. I hope to see Kyler this year is that with Cliff's offense, with Kingsbury's offense, was just quick game and just getting the ball out, which Kyler can do, but he's also a phenomenal deep ball thrower and great throwing intermediate, which is usually tied into play action stuff. And it's like, use that, like tie that all in together, not just spread it out and throw quick game over and over. Defenses love when you do that. Okay. 3-yard gain. Fine. 3-yard gain. Fine. Like they will love doing that. So I think using more of Kyler's gifts than what he's already shown, if he does play this year, would be such a win. I'm just curious. I just want to see him outside that offense because he does have some gifts that I think people have underrated for over the last couple of years because of the injuries and stuff.
My question, what is Kyler and what does he look like by the end of the year? And what is the plan by the end of the year? By all accounts, he's been great so far.
That's good.
He's engaged, curious, and they've gotten a lot out of him personality wise. And I think they're excited about that so far.
That's awesome. Seriously, that's so awesome to hear though. Sorry.
I just nothing but positive reviews from the staff so far about what it's been like to work with him. what does the on-field results look like when he gets on the field?
Yeah.
And if you do end up being the worst team in the league this year and you get the number 1 pick, what sort of decision are you left with at the end? Does he have trade value? Does he not have trade value? Because one of the biggest weird kind of incongruencies about this team is that I can't remember a team that has been rebuilding with a $50 million quarterback.
Right.
Because typically when you have a $50 million quarterback, that guy keeps you good enough to never be rebuilding.
Mm-hmm.
So the timelines are completely diverged from one another, and squaring those is difficult. So in this case specifically, you would be well served, in my opinion, if you get the number 1 pick, to reset the timeline and then see what you could get for him. So does that play out? Is that how the season goes? That's the biggest question to me.
Yeah.
What does Kyler look like by the end, and who is he valuable to? Is
the
he
fact
valuable
that it's not
to Cardinals
crazy
or someone else?
Yeah. The fact that that's a very viable timeline is like, that's what makes it interesting. You know, like that. It's not just like us having fun here. It's like, no, that's a very real thing that might happen, which is such a unique thing in this NFL, especially his age. What is he, 26 right now? 20.
Young, so he's shown flashes. So his contract is tough, man.
Yes.
So do we get to a place at the end of this year where there's a team backed into a corner that says, yeah, I'll take a chance. Yeah. Second round pick, whatever ends up taking. And I know that seems low for a quarterback, but his contract is huge. It is a big, big deal. So if you're willing to take that on and incur the risk because you don't have an answer at the position, is there a team in that situation at the end of this season? And does he show enough to make that team talk themselves into him? That's my question. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that Kyler is not going to be the quarterback of this team next year, but I think you have to at least acknowledge that it's more likely than it would be in almost any other scenario.
The door exists. Like, you know what I mean? Like the sliding door exists. Like it's just a thought. It's definitely there and it's definitely real. I want to see him for 6 weeks at least. You know what I mean? Like see him in November.
I think they want to see him for 6 weeks at least too.
And that could be a win-win for everybody,
Yes.
So it's like, I know.
I don't think
that's where it's going to be interesting.
I don't think they'll get ahead of themselves, put him on the field, but I think it's in everyone's best interest for him to play a little bit this year.
Correct.
Biggest question about the defense. I
said, who's playable?
Who's playable and where do they play? So the most interesting thing, and this has since become public, so I feel comfortable talking about it. Zaven Collins is a pass rusher.
I saw that.
So they, yet again, the Arizona Cardinals draft somebody to play one position and he does not play that position. This has happened with the 2 guys they drafted to play linebacker. Isaiah Simmons is now a full-time safety / like nickel player. And Zaven Collins is now a full-time pass rusher. He's going to be Hassan Reddick in this defense. So what does that look like?
Shout out Hassan Reddick too. Another tweener that they try to do.
Exactly. So that's my biggest question is that where these young pieces that they drafted, are they more viable in some of these new spots? Other than that, I can't work up much enthusiasm or interest.
I know.
Arizona Cardinals defense.
Baker get traded, like that.
They just gave him new money, so I think
so. They probably can't. That's right. Yeah, that's really it, though. It's like it's really hard to kind of like. I was trying to find some guys I can maybe get really excited about. I don't want to spoil my breakout player, but it's gonna be Simmons spoilers. But it's like that's really what it is. It's like just any of these guys show any flashes where I'm like, oh, okay, that guy's interesting. Like that guy's, that's some guy I talk about in February, when I just throw when we're in the free agency period or something like that. So that's really it though. And Nick Rawlis is the defensive coordinator. I want to see what he runs. What Jonathan
he's going to call defensive plays.
Gannon's giving them that.
Yes,
good sign from Gannon too. And that's the thing. It's like Gannon got made fun of for some press conference stuff and everything, but it's like, I don't know. He just seems organized. That's just how I read it. I've never met him, never talked to the guy. He just seems organized and seems like a pro. So that's where I don't know. I don't have as much.
The bet that you're making on him is that he's going to come in and provide stability to your building.
Yeah.
The sell for him
is they hired 2 adults as GM and the head coach. And that's what they needed. That's what this whole franchise needed. He kind of epitomizes that.
We'll see what happens. I mean, when you're hiring that guy, the culture guy, and the guy who's not going to call offensive or defensive plays to you, that culture needs to exist.
Yeah.
In that exact scenario, you need a Vrabel or a Tomlin or one of these guys that's going to consistently having you, Dan Campbell, one of these guys who's consistently having you play above your level.
Nope.
And that, if we're talking about, we'll get to that in a second. But that when we're talking about success for the Cardinals, that I think is important to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Your X factor for the Cardinals. So you got.
I have Kyler Murray's health, the Texans record, and Zaven Collins. that is, I think they're going to be keeping an eye on the Houston Texans every single week just to see how that draft pick's going, but along with their own. But I would say really Zaven Collins is one. Like you said, he moved the pass rusher. It's just getting something out of him. I think he will kind of really be a good feel for how the staff is using him, like what he grows as a player. Do they get some type of building block out of him? But really, that's it. Is like him and just any of these former draft picks, either this year or prior years from the old regime, like Rondale Moore, just any of these guys stepping up and looking like tangible players. That's really the X factor of this season. And I think really the crux of the season for the Cardinals.
To me, it's just Murray's health, Murray's future. Where are we at the end of the season on Kyler Murray? I think that is it's going to dictate the future of the organization. Truly, like it's an X factor not just for this season, but for what the Arizona Cardinals are over the next 5 years
for this whole regime. Yeah.
So that to me is an easy one. Breakout candidate for you with the Cardinals.
Isaiah Simmons. It's one guy that kind of was easy to kind of narrow down for me. Last year, I think he finally found his role in the NFL as being a slot guy, which lets him kind of read the game, come to him. He doesn't have to be in the box. I don't think being in the box is good for him. I think it's give him some space to use his gifts, let him run and use his range.
The eyes never slowed down.
Right. He went from about 15% of his snaps were in the slot in 2021 to about half last year. But he's rushing the passer less from that, but he's a good blitzer because you can use his gifts again. Also, he's a solid tackler. He's not going to be a thumper, but he can run and hit some guys. So I think Isaiah Simmons, because the game is slowing down for him enough, I think he's going to be with a decent coaching staff, or at least maybe a sound one. And I think if they just keep him in the slot, that would be a positive. But I just want to see the next step, and I think he'll break out. I think we're starting to see some flashes of why he was drafted so high, as this kind of just moldy, Gumby. What can this guy be? He can be everything. And then now we're finally seeing what his actual role will be in the NFL.
That's a lot of faith, man. That's a lot. That's a lot.
What else? I got no one else.
I totally understand that.
And I'm not even saying like Pro Bowl caliber. I'm just saying like a solid starter, Isaiah Simmons. That's a breakout for me.
I got two-ish. Michael Wilson, the receiver they drafted in the third round, has apparently looked very good, had a really good Senior Bowl, just struggled to stay healthy in college. And he's going to have an opportunity to really win a role on this team. Like you talked about, all the other receivers are 5'8". They got a certain type of guy. So him being a 6'2", 215-pound receiver that can just be an NFL receiver for them, he's going to get a chance to do that. And
he literally and figuratively stands out. That's what he does.
The early returns have been good. And again, it's shorts and T-shirts. Who knows? But he apparently has looked good so far. And the other guy that they're excited about in year two, and they think he fits this offense really well, is Trey McBride, their second-year tight end.
Yeah.
They feel like can be a much bigger influence, have a much bigger role on this team than he did as a rookie, where he only played a couple hundred snaps.
Yeah. He's like a classic F, not like the ones that are converted receivers, but like a true like wing tight end, move tight end. And so an offense that isn't going to be an 11 and 10 personnel or 0-1 personnel and being spread out will be best for him. Like that's how they use him at Colorado State, was in line. I think that's actually, as a pass catcher from in line, is the best way to use him. So that's interesting to hear.
What does success look like for the 2023 Cardinals?
Find any players that are worth working with and figure out their QB situation. Just figuring it out, I think, is a win. Like it doesn't matter what it is, just figuring it out.
We did this when we talked about the new regimes. We did the show in June. And who are your building blocks? Can you identify 2 or 3, 4 or 5, however many by the end of the season? And 2, what do you look like by the end of the year? How are we talking about you? Are we going to talk about you the way we talked about the 2021 Lions, where even though they're the worst team in the league, or one of the worst teams in the league, they're playing a certain way, and you can just feel like the tide is changing there a little bit. All that culture bullshit that we talk about, does that start to manifest in a real way? That's it.
And it's a team that needs it. A franchise that needs it. Like seriously. But I love the Lions comparison, because that's like the doldrums that you're kind of getting into with this team right now.